Content warning. This podcast may contain unsuitable language, depictions of adult themes, and content of a violent and distressing nature. Listener discretion is advised. This is Crime Trials, Episode 4, a show that focuses on the stories behind the crimes as they work their way through the criminal justice system, from tragedy to verdict. According to leading experts on intimate partner violence, leaving a relationship is often the most dangerous time in a woman's life. Coercive control is a fairly new term that is now recognized as a form of domestic abuse. It is defined as a pattern of psychological and emotional behaviors that enforce the perpetrator's rules on a victim through varying levels of abuse and degrees of severity. It's a cunning use of covert aggression designed to disempower the victim. It can also include financial control or abuse of family funds. Research shows the risk of domestic homicide becomes the highest during the period right before and immediately following a separation from these types of relationships. Experts believe it is the fear of losing power and control that can escalate the relationship towards physical abuse. Prior to this period, the other partner may believe the woman is controllable or still controlled through manipulative or other coercive methods. When that control ends, an unstable and emotionally abusive partner may feel desperate. He may want to have the final say on how the relationship ends. Sometimes, that say can end in murder. In late March 2019, 41-year-old Maureen Argie from Londonderry, New Hampshire, was finalizing her plans to leave her tumultuous 13-year marriage. She had met her husband, William Argie, known by his family and friends as Bill, through her best friend, Kelly Hobbs. She and Kelly went to college together, and later she dated Kelly's brother, and the two eventually got married. The marriage produced 2 children, Ella, who was 9, and Gavin, who was 6 at the time. The marriage had been rocky for many years, but Maureen, who was a fixer by nature, tried her best to make her marriage work. Maureen held a master's degree in sociology and worked as a case manager and social worker for an elder care facility. By both personality and profession, she was a caretaker. Unfortunately, Bill didn't appreciate her caring ways. In fact, he resented it. Bill, when he was able to keep a job, worked as a physician's assistant. Recently, he had been working per diem shifts when he could find them through a healthcare staffing agency. While this usually came with a higher pay, it was unsteady work and didn't provide a regular income or any extra benefits. One of the reasons why Bill couldn't maintain employment was his erratic behavior and uncontrollable gambling addiction. Maureen was described as shy, quiet, and private, but also close with both her family and Bill's family. Just a year prior, Maureen made one last attempt at saving her family. She sat down with Bill's family and close friends for an intervention for his gambling addiction. Unfortunately, the intervention didn't go as planned and wasn't well received by Bill. Instead of accepting his family and friends' concern for him, he interpreted their actions as a betrayal. Most of all, he blamed Maureen for trying to humiliate him. Bill wasn't contrite or embarrassed. He was angry and insulted. Over that next year, the marriage continued to deteriorate, and Maureen had no choice but to make plans to separate their lives. It was time for Maureen to prioritize herself and her children. Her main focus with the separation was minimizing any change she could on her children's schedules. They were always her first priority. Maureen was a planner and a list maker, She was organized and had a hands-on approach when it came to goals and tasks. She was handling her imminent separation no differently. She took command and already had a list of assignments for family and close friends. That last week of March 2019, she was finalizing and coordinating her move to her mother-in-law's home. She was also arranging small home repairs and painting to place her home on the market by the end of April. Maureen arranged to move to Bill's mom's house so each of her children could have their own room and stay in the same school district. After the home was sold and their debts were cleared, she planned to move her and her children to a home of their own. This didn't sit well with Bill. He felt like his mother wasn't there for him and was taking Maureen's side in the divorce. No matter how horribly he treated his family, he still saw himself as the victim. To Bill, the problem wasn't his lying, gambling, stealing, or abusive behavior. It was their fault for calling him out on his bad behavior. Bill was always the victim. On April 3rd, the day of Maureen's likely murder, Bill had a phone call with his mother.
Mom, what I'm trying to say is yes, you opened your arms and home to your daughter and her child when her life was crumbling in time of need, and now you're uprooting your life and opening your home to a non-child and my kids. That option was never even offered to me. So yes, this hurts. Sorry if this is upsetting to you. I do think I have a right to feel hurt, embarrassed, maybe a little angry. How am I not in some way to feel this?
And then from Ms. Quinn, I understand. I could have offered you the same option, but I was not able to see how you could have managed raising the children. Your life was/is unstable, and maybe I was wrong, but I just did not see how you could do it. I don't think I need to tell or remind you of all the past events. I am not even sure if a court would even allow it right now if the two of you ever get into a battle over it. I have not offered to parent my grandchildren. That is your responsibility and Mo's. If you think you can and want to be the custodial parent, talk to Mo about it. She might be agreeable. I only want to help where I can, and it is not my intention to anger anyone.
So if she's agreeable to me being custodial parent, I can live in the house with them while trying to find work and parent my children, because not just my life is unstable, everyone is. But not to say that I don't understand what you meant. But isn't that what the unit is all about, being close? I would be close to loved ones and my kids and support system, not feeling sorry about myself and not being able to see my kids on my timeline because I live 2 hours away really doesn't help much. Units support each other when needed, because Karen would still be there, my sister, who I'm sure is going to need support with Gracie, as you and Larry will be in Maine. Maybe I'm thinking wrong.
From Ms. Quinn, not doing this. Find something to focus on today. I'm not bantering with you.
Yes, after all of Bill's emotional and financial instability, he thought he should have custody of his children. Not because they were his focus, or because he would miss them. Rather, he was resentful of having to finally provide for them and pay child support. He was also resentful of his mother offering to help Maureen. This was the ultimate betrayal. Bill felt like he was being abandoned by those who were supposed to love and support him, even through his bad behavior. Bill's life was crumbling, and Maureen's life was only getting better. She had just interviewed for a promotion and raise at her job and was feeling extremely hopeful. So it was a surprise when neither she nor Bill showed up on April 4th, 2019, to pick up their children from school. Not only were the children never picked up from school that day, they were also never going back home. They would never again live as a family with their mother and father. It was a devastating and unimaginable shock. Soon, everyone would know that Maureen was dead, and Bill had fled to a casino in Connecticut, where he would be found gambling and eventually charged with Maureen's murder. After many delays, the trial of William Argie began on November 30th, 2021. Most of the delays were caused by Bill and his demand to represent himself, only to change his mind and want to hire counsel again. He went back and forth like this up until the very eve of his trial. Eventually, just prior to trial, he agreed to allow court-ordered shadow counsel to take the lead and represent him. As usual, the trial began with opening statements. The prosecution gave a short statement, just 20 minutes in length. Prosecutor Heather Chernisky gave the opening remark by describing the charges against Bill. Those were for first-degree murder, with an alternative count of reckless second-degree murder. This is called a lesser included charge. It gives the jury the option of a lower count in the event they saw the murder as a crime of passion rather than premeditated. Bill was also charged with the count of falsifying evidence because he took Maureen's phone and disposed of it in order to impair law enforcement's ability to aid in Maureen's murder investigation. Prosecutor Chernisky told the jury about an angry man with a disintegrating marriage and an out-of-control gambling addiction. She told the jury that hate marked the alleged motive. However, there was a financial motive as well. Bill had, unbeknownst to Maureen, taken out a $400,000 life insurance policy against her life. She told the jury that as Maureen was about to embark on a new life with her family, friends, and children, Bill wasn't going to allow her to move on without him. She described how he continually gambled, losing his family's money week after week, borrowing money from anyone foolish enough to lend it.
At the casino, the defendant, otherwise known as Doc, spent his time playing cards and blaming Maureen for his issues, about how she didn't make enough money, about how she was ugly, about how she was holding him back, about all the problems he was having with her. Complaints he also voiced time and again to his friends and family. And one of his gambling associates, Jamie Timbus, will tell you about the defendant's verbalized hatred of Maureen and his wish that she was dead. He will tell you that the defendant not only talked about wanting Maureen dead, but he tried to put that plan into action in February 2019, less than 2 months before her murder.
She explained to the jury that just 2 months prior to Maureen's murder, he asked his friend, Jamie Timbus, to help him murder his wife. When Jamie declined, Bill asked him if he knew of anyone else who might be willing to do it for a portion of the life insurance proceeds. He told Jamie he wanted to pay someone to make Maureen's death look like a suicide. Unfortunately, it was only after Maureen's death when Mr. Timbus notified the police. Far too late to help Maureen.
In the weeks before her murder, the defendant's anger and resentment toward Maureen intensified. You will hear from the defendant's family and friends about the hateful things he said about Maureen. How he thought she was holding him back. How she didn't make enough money. How he wouldn't pay child support if she left. How he blamed her for all of his problems. And at the end of March 2019, Maureen decided to leave the defendant behind and begin a new life without him. She told the defendant that she wanted a divorce. She outlined her plans to move out and sell their Londonderry home through emails to friends and family, enlisting their help to make the change as smooth as possible for her children. She emailed and texted back and forth with her support system during the days before her murder, making specific plans for the upcoming weekend, April 6th and 7th, and the following weekend.
This very act of making imminent plans shows that Maureen was not suicidal leading up to the divorce. She was moving forward with her life, and the defendant was losing power and control. He was also losing his chance to end her life and walk away with $400,000. The jury was told that the day before she was murdered, she interviewed for a promotion and a raise. She also made plans with Bill's sister and mother to get the house ready for sale, and to move Bill to his mother's vacation home in Maine.
The plan was for Maureen to take their children to live in Manchester with the defendant's mother. The defendant, on the other hand, he was also talking about his living arrangements on April 3rd. But instead of making the plans, he was being told the plan. That he would be living alone, without his children, hours away in Maine at his mother's vacation home. And he wasn't happy about that. And to him, there was only one person to blame for that. And the very next day, the defendant murdered Maureen by asphyxiating her, forcibly cutting off her oxygen supply while she laid in her bed.
After Bill allegedly murdered Maureen, he had to start planning his defense and alibi. That began after taking his children to school.
First, after the defendant murdered Maureen, he had to deal with his kids. The defendant's children, Ella and Gavin, were 9 and 6 years old at the time of their mother's murder. During this investigation, they were interviewed at the Child Advocacy Center by an interviewer trained in speaking with children. You will hear a portion of those interviews during this trial. And you will hear that when the defendant's children woke up on April 4th, 2019 for school, the defendant told them that their mother was sleeping, that she wasn't feeling well, that they needed to leave her alone, and that they could not touch her. But his daughter Ella opened her parents' bedroom door and saw her mother, unbeknownst to her, already dead, laying in bed with her hair blending in with the bedding.
Bill dropped the kids off at the bus stop with a handwritten note telling them his mother, Brenda Quinn, would be picking the children up from school that day. When the school called Brenda, she had no idea she was supposed to be getting the children. She was surprised, confused, and worried. Then the jury heard about Bill's alleged suicide attempt that morning. She told the jury they would see surveillance video of Bill leaving the house, going to Home Depot and buying a box cutter. Despite being a physician's assistant and knowing how to end his life, his suicide attempt failed. So he did what anyone else would have done in that position. He staged his wife's suicide, took her car, her credit cards, and her phone, and headed to Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. Apparently, he was feeling lucky.
While the defendant was gambling, his family tried to contact him. He didn't answer the phone. They called Maureen. She didn't answer the phone. Growing concerned, the defendant's sister, Kelly Hobbs, who was also one of Maureen's closest friends, called 911, asking the police to go to the defendant's home and conduct what is called a welfare check to see if the defendant and Maureen were okay. The police entered the defendant's home in Londonderry, and they didn't find the defendant there, because the defendant was at Foxwoods Casino in Connecticut. But the police did find Maureen dead, lying in bed with her hair blending in with the bedding, just as the defendant's 9-year-old daughter described.
The prosecution ended by telling the jury that the defense would speak next, and they may come up with a theory that Maureen killed herself. She continued by telling the jury that any such theory would be contrary to the evidence they will hear. She finished by saying, because the defendant tried to make it look like Maureen killed herself, her death would be considered undetermined as to cause, but not as to manner. The manner was homicide. The cause was either strangulation or suffocation, both causing asphyxia and death. As predicted by the prosecutor, the public defender, Attorney Dunn, would suggest that Maureen killed herself. The audio during the defense's opening statement is accompanied with a loud fan noise, so for that reason we will summarize the clips after playing them. The defense began by telling the jury that Maureen Argie was a sad and broken person, and for reasons they will never know, she decided to take her own life. She chose not to leave a note and did it because she couldn't, face life without Bill. Yes, she made these opening statements with a straight face, and without a hint of self-loathing. Attorney Dunn told the jury that they will address the alleged solicitation of murder allegations during the trial.
On April 3rd, Maureen worked late. Bill picked up the kids from school, he fed them dinner, he helped them with their homework. Maureen came home before 8 in time to say goodnight to Gavin and Ella, before Bill read them their bedtime story, kissed them goodnight, and shut their bedroom door. Back downstairs, Bill and Maureen sat down to talk. They didn't fight, not at first. They talked about the kids. They talked about the state of their marriage. They were sad and they were heartbroken, but they knew this marriage could not be saved. At some point, though, the conversation took an ugly turn. Bill put his foot down. Said this divorce was going to happen, but Maureen was not going to dictate its terms. This was going to be a fight. Custody of their children was going to be a fight. Control over the sale of the house was going to be a fight. Division of assets, many of which were in Bill's name, was going to be a fight. There was not going to be a peaceful resolution, not anytime soon.
Because Bill intended to fight Maureen on all aspects of the divorce from property division to custody, the defense alleged she didn't want to fight. She didn't have the strength to battle Bill. The next morning when he found Maureen's body, he didn't want to fight either. He allegedly found her with a sheet wrapped around her neck, and the other end around the headboard. Being the loving father that he was, he couldn't allow his children to see their mother in that condition. So he tampered with evidence, removed the sheet, and disposed of it later along with Maureen's phone. Despite his medical knowledge as a licensed physician's assistant, he decided to commit suicide too. But when his attempt failed, he wanted the next best thing to death: a poker table.
Bill was an addict and gambling was his drug of choice. We might expect a person addicted to drugs or alcohol to use or drink in times of crisis, and this was no different. Maureen's sudden and unexpected death was simply too much for Bill to bear. And so instead of feeling his grief, instead of feeling his regret, Bill went to the casino. The casinos are designed to feel like a kind of refuge from the outside world. You step into a casino and you quickly lose all track of time. There are no windows to the outside, no clocks hang on the wall, no news plays on the televisions. The lighting is dim and artificial, the sounds hypnotic and constant. Anything you might need, food, drinks, entertainment, is all within arm's reach. You see, the very business model of a casino requires customers to keep on playing through their losses. That's how casinos make a profit. By their very design, casinos provide customers with a kind of anesthesia. Short of death or sleep, Foxwoods allowed Bill to shut his eyes and wish it all away.
The defense explained that as an addict, Bill was drawn to comfort, and his place of comfort was the hypnotic and rhythmic sounds of a loud casino. However, his escape was short-lived as the tribal police arrived the next day, pulling Bill from his complimentary massage, steak dinner, and losing hands of poker. It was then he remembered his failed suicide attempt with the Home Depot box cutters, and asked for medical assistance. Bill was taken to the nearest medical facility and given first aid for his superficial cuts. He was also held on a 72-hour psych hold. In the exam room, he told the police he was so relieved they found him, because he wanted to tell someone what Maureen had done to herself. Then the defense attorney explained how the easy target for Maureen's sad and tragic death was obviously Bill. He had poisoned the well of good faith, and was therefore the easiest target for a set of lazy investigators. Defense counsel alleged it was easier for law enforcement to believe Bill killed Maureen than it was to believe Maureen wasn't equipped for an acrimonious divorce.
Bill made his promise. He was not going to make this easy. If Maureen wanted to take anything from him, she would have to fight. Fight for the kids, fight for the house, fight for the car. And Maureen didn't want to fight anymore. She had fought for the marriage long enough. To fight to get out of the marriage was simply too much to bear.
The defense said because every family member, friend, and coworker knew Maureen was leaving, it was easier to believe Bill killed her than it was to believe that Maureen flawlessly killed herself in a manner consistent with homicide. Last, she covered Bill's alleged solicitation for Maureen's murder. This was explained away by attacking the character of the accuser. It came from a man who was a friend and the owner of a club where Bill lost thousands and thousands of dollars. He was allegedly angry and jealous when Bill gambled elsewhere, and this was a combination of guilt and payback.
When you hear Jamie Timbus' story, ask yourself why he cannot document when this supposed conversation even happened. If Jamie's story is true, if Bill's reason for meeting up with him that evening was murder, then why didn't Jamie call the police that night? Because Bill said he was just kidding? Because Bill spends money at his club? Jamie didn't call the police that night because this conversation never happened. Jamie Timbus is lying.
Following the defense's opening, the prosecution made a motion to allow the hearsay evidence of Maureen's state of mind at the time of her death to come into evidence. In some states, certain defense strategies have to be approved by the court. New Hampshire isn't one of those states. Therefore, the defense's opening statements were the first time the prosecution was informed of the defense's plan to push a suicide theory. As a result, the prosecution wanted previously excluded evidence to be allowed in as well, including a phone call Maureen made a few nights before her death with the New Hampshire Police Department. Maureen called the police wanting to make sure her phone lines were working, as she was concerned that her husband may react in a way that would require a fast response time from them. She stated things with her husband were about to get tense, and she may need to, quote, protect herself. She also called her father and told him she was worried Bill was monitoring her phone lines. The court reversed the previous pretrial motions in limine and allowed the hearsay evidence as to Maureen's state of mind, as well as the testimony from Maureen's father. The judge also allowed in the phone call evidence made by Maureen to the police just before her murder. And with that, the prosecution began their case in chief. They went into the cell phone data showing Bill's movements along with surveillance data showing Bill at the Home Depot buying box cutters, then coming home and leaving a few hours later, looking no worse for the wear, and leaving in Maureen's SUV. They called the New Hampshire State Police along with the tribal police who arrested Bill. They called a series of Maureen's friends, who all testified that Bill was angry and upset with Maureen when she prevented him from gambling. They testified that Maureen was under tremendous financial stress. This was as a result of Bill's inability to retain employment. They also discussed her plans to leave Bill, sell the family home, and move in with Bill's mother. Bill's sister, Kelly Hobbs, took the stand. She was clearly a torn and reluctant witness. She had to be reminded several times of testimony she gave to the police before she would admit anything negative about Bill. Of course, she was also one of Maureen's best friends and eventually admitted her brother blamed Maureen for all of his problems. She testified that Bill didn't want to move from his home or pay for child support. Bill also wanted to move out of state, where his employment options were better. However, Maureen refused to move or uproot their children. Bill told Kelly he felt Maureen was holding him back from financial freedom.
That he went back and forth between wanting a divorce and not. He was very upset. At times he wanted to leave the state and start somewhere new, and other times he was worried about losing custody of the kids or not being able to see them as much, and then he was worried about losing some of his money, like paying so he kind of went the gamut with his concerns about divorce.
Do you remember him being angry towards Maureen during these conversations?
Angry towards Maureen?
When he would talk to you about?
Oh, yes, he's angry, yes.
Bill was also upset that Maureen didn't make more money, as most of his problems were financial. He wasn't contributing towards the household bills. He hadn't made a payment on his truck in more than 3 months, and Maureen refused to pay his personal or auto bills. She could barely keep up with the children's expenses and the house payment. In fact, she had borrowed money the week before she was murdered from Kelly Hobbs to pay for the children to go to summer camp. According to Bill's sister, he felt like he could afford to gamble because when he did work, he made good money. He believed it was a supplement to his income. He didn't believe he had an issue with gambling. The intervention angered him and left him feeling humiliated. To Bill, Maureen was holding him back from a better life.
Did the defendant talk to you about wanting to go to school?
Yes.
What did he say?
He was thinking about going back to school and going to law school.
Okay. And did he say he wanted to go to law school to fix injustices against him? And without getting into any specifics?
Yes.
Okay. And what else did he talk to you about during that call that you remember?
He didn't. So what I had said earlier, where I remembered part of the conversation was about him moving to Maine, and he was worried that he wouldn't see his kids, and he didn't want to be a part-time dad. So he thought he would fight Maureen on custody. That was part of the conversation.
And what was in Maine?
My mother has a second home in Maine.
And what Was he intending to move to that home in Maine?
That was a potential option for him, as and I think was what he had agreed to do, to sell the house.
And how did he feel about his planned living situation to go and live in Maine?
He didn't want to live in Maine.
Kelly finished her direct testimony by describing the events on the day Maureen died. She heard from her mom and sister that Ella and Gavin hadn't been picked up from school that day, and no one could get a hold of Bill or Maureen. Kelly repeatedly called both of their phones and never got an answer. She called the police for a well check and drove straight over. She also called Maureen's brother Matt to let him know what was happening. It wasn't long before the police found Maureen's body, and she learned her brother was missing. On cross-examination, Kelly admitted that Maureen seemed stressed and overwhelmed. She stated she was never concerned for Maureen's safety. However, she was concerned for her brother's safety. Maureen had arranged to have any guns removed from the Argie family home out of fear that Bill might hurt himself. But as we all know, narcissists rarely harm themselves. Next, Ina Gaudet, Maureen's mother, testified. She described Maureen as strong, having an inner strength, resilient, quiet and shy. She said Maureen didn't like to be the center of attention. She testified that Maureen was an attentive and loving mother who lived for her children. She was happy, healthy, and didn't appear suicidal. She admitted that Maureen did not believe that Bill would ever harm her. However, she personally believed Bill was capable of hurting her daughter and worried for her safety. On the night Maureen died, she sent her mother an email saying she couldn't find her phone and feared Bill had taken it. Ina never talked to her daughter again. Jennifer Jones with Child Protective Services testified next regarding the forensic interview she conducted on the Argie children. The prosecution then played a video of a forensic interview with Ella, where she described her father, telling her that her mother was really, really sick, and she wasn't allowed to go into her room or talk to her. However, Ella did go into her mother's room, and her mom wasn't responding to her. Ella could only see her mother's hair before her father took her to the bus stop with her brother. Next, Bill's sister, Karen Argie, testified. Bill had confided in her that he wanted a separation, rather than a divorce, so he didn't have to pay Maureen any money. Bill was also concerned with his reputation, and felt that Maureen had ruined his good name with the intervention the year prior. Bill also said that he didn't want to pay child support, because he didn't want 1 penny of the money to go to Maureen, and he didn't think she deserved any of it, his hard-earned money. The last time she saw Maureen was on April 3rd, the day she likely died. She told Karen and Bill's mother that she was scared for herself and for the kids, with all of the upcoming changes and how Bill might react. Karen assured her that Bill's family was on her side and would always support her in her decisions. When Maureen left to go home, she didn't have any concerns that her sister-in-law would kill herself that night. Karen told the jury her brother was angry that Maureen was utilizing his family and his support system, and he felt a deep sense of betrayal. Although Maureen was a private person, Karen was aware that Maureen was having problems with Bill not coming home, forgetting to pick up the children, and gambling away his paychecks when he did work. She also discussed him draining their family savings and gambling away the money. Next, Maureen's brother testified. Matt Gaudet was close with his sister Maureen. They communicated several times a week and saw each other for all holidays, birthdays, and family events. He knew his sister was planning to divorce Bill, and the family were planning to help her get her home ready for sale and help her move. She loved her children, always sent photos of their grades, sporting events, or activities. She was a very attentive and proud mother and shared all of their accomplishments. She had no intention of leaving her kids or giving Bill custody. He described her as soft-spoken and reserved with a smile that lit up a room. She had a quiet inner strength and excelled at school and sports. Everything came naturally to her, and she was always outgoing and wanted to help and support people. Matt testified that his sister was hopeful, not suicidal. In fact, Matt and Maureen had been discussing Easter plans. Matt also testified that he and his family were supportive of her plans to divorce Bill. He told the jury that Maureen suspected Bill of reading her emails and monitoring her cell phone, yet she wasn't afraid for her own safety. Next, the prosecution called the defendant's former friend and casino owner, Jamie Timbus. Jamie testified that he called the Londonderry police station the moment he heard about Maureen's death. He felt he had pertinent information to their investigation. He told the jury that Bill had been gambling at his establishment 3 to 4 hours at a time, almost daily. Although sometimes he would stay from open to close. Jamie considered Bill a friend, and had even gone with him to Foxwoods Casino on previous occasions. He told the jury over the years he personally watched Bill lose hundreds of thousands of dollars. He also told the jury that Maureen would occasionally call looking for Bill, and Jamie would deny he was there. In mid-February, Jamie and the defendant had dinner together, where Bill asked him for a favor.
He told me, as I said, that he had a $400,000 insurance policy on his wife, and I asked him if she knew about the policy. He said no, and he said, I'll give you half of the money if you help me kill my wife. And I said, Doc, please don't talk crazy to me. He said, no, I'm serious. And I said, please, I'm not interested. I don't want to have this conversation. And then he said, if you can find me a hitman to do it, I will give you a piece of the insurance money. And can I repeat what I said to him?
So we're all adults, and I've said the word fuck in front of the jurors before, so let's talk about what was said there in this conversation.
I said, are you out of your fucking mind? I said, I don't want to have this conversation. I want nothing to do with this. I said, I really don't want anything to do with this. But that was my response to him.
Bill said he wanted her dead because he hated her and she was ruining his life. Of most importance was the fact that Bill needed money to clear his debts and avoid bankruptcy. The conversation ended, but then he tried to bring it up a second time. Jamie again made it clear he didn't want to hear anything about murdering Maureen. He told the jury that once it was clear he wasn't on board, Bill tried to walk back the offer and pretended he was just kidding. He confirmed on direct examination that Maureen didn't know Bill had a life insurance policy on her. Bill also told Jamie that some of the reasons he hated Maureen were because he wanted to go to law school, and she didn't make enough money to support him for 3 years. Additionally, his gambling was an ongoing issue for Maureen.
That he hated her, that he found her disgusting, that she was fat, that unattractive, just horrible things. I mean, he said terrible things about his wife on a regular basis. Terrible things.
With respect to the defendant talking about his wife being fat, being ugly, unattractive, did that conversation or conversations continue up to the last time when you saw the defendant?
Yes.
You skipped out of your business?
Yes.
And again, these conversations, what the defendant would say about his wife, was this a once-in-time thing, seldom thing? Was this a regular thing that the defendant would talk about when he was around you and when you heard him talk to others?
It was common. Very common. And it got worse. It got worse the last 6 or 8 months. It got worse. It was vile. It was more vile.
He didn't only have vile things to say about his wife. He had opinions on how to murder someone and get away with it.
I remember sitting next to him one day at the poker table, and he turned to me and he said, if you stick a hypodermic needle in someone with nothing in it while they're sleeping, that they would die and no one would ever know how they died. And I said, Doc, what are you talking about? He said, I'm just telling you, the air bubble will go into them and they would die and it would look like a heart attack or an embolism or something. And, you know, I don't remember him saying the perfect crime, but he said, and I said, Doc, what are you talking about? He said, nothing, no, nothing. Well, why are you talking crazy? I remember having that conversation with him.
In addition to that conversation, when you hear the defendant talk and threaten to kill his wife, other than that act of solicitation at the restaurant?
Yes, he often said that he would be better off without her. Yes, he did.
And Mr. Timbus, I want to circle once again back to that meeting with the defendant at the restaurant in Manchester 2 months before his wife's death. Do you recall the defendant, bless you, talking about how he wanted his wife to be murdered? Bless you.
He wanted to make it look like an accident.
And how so?
He wanted to make it look like she killed herself.
The witness said Bill also told him that Maureen suffered from depression, and he wanted to make her murder look like a suicide. On cross-examination, the witness held steady to his version of events.
Because you didn't take him seriously, right?
I don't understand the question.
Because you didn't take him seriously.
I did not take what seriously?
Whatever he was venting about. You thought he was just venting.
No, I was well aware that his home life was in shambles and that his marriage was disintegrating and that he couldn't stand his wife. But did I take the fact that he asked me or mentioned on multiple occasions that he was going to kill his wife? No, I didn't take that part seriously. But the rest of it, I did take seriously. Yes,
so
I
you
did.
took seriously that his wife was concerned about his gambling addiction.
Did I take that seriously?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
But you continued to invite him to your establishment.
Yes, I did.
The defense tried to make the point to the jury that the witness was lying because he never went to the police when Bill allegedly first began discussing killing his wife. Jamie was straightforward with his answers, admitting that he knew that Bill had a gambling habit and admitted covering for him. He told defense counsel he knew Bill's life was in shambles. He believed it was to his credit that he contacted the police the very next morning after hearing about Maureen's alleged suicide. Next, the prosecution called the medical examiner, Dr. Christine James, to the stand. She began by describing Maureen's visible injuries. Maureen had petechial hemorrhaging in her eyes and nose. These injuries were consistent with applied pressure or smothering. Maureen also had bruising on her tongue, where she may have pushed against her teeth or mouth trying to obtain air. Additionally, there was defensive bruising on her extremities, including both her hands and legs. During the autopsy, the ME found subcutaneous bruising in her neck, which was consistent with strangulation and applied pressure to her carotid artery. All of her injuries were consistent with either smothering, suffocation, strangulation, or a combination thereof. Based on the autopsy results, Dr. James determined the cause of death to be probable homicidal asphyxia. Today, as she testified, she would have found the manner of death to be homicidal asphyxia, removing the word probable. On cross-examination, she was asked how the physical findings at autopsy would pertain to ligature strangulation. The defense implied that a larger sheet used for strangulation or hanging might not leave a furrowed mark on the neck due to the width and texture. A furrowed mark is common in most hanging deaths. Unfortunately, for the defense, Dr. James explained to the jury that Maureen's injuries were not consistent with a hanging death using a sheet. Next, they attacked her youth and limited years of practical experience. Dr. James explained again to the jury that with hindsight and 2 more years of experience, she would have definitively described Maureen's death as homicidal asphyxia, omitting any qualifier words, such as probable. With that testimony, the prosecution rested their case in chief. Next, the defense presented their case in chief with their star witness, the defendant, William Argie, Jr. He began by vehemently denying murdering his wife. Every question he answered involved uncomfortably long pauses. He would sigh and then look up at the ceiling quite a bit, as if reflecting on the events, as if he were earnestly trying to recall a memory. This might come off sincere if he didn't do it continually, even for mundane answers which clearly didn't require any reflection or difficult recall. His cadence was also exceptionally slow. He painstakingly described the last known night of Maureen's life. He described himself as patient, loving, and kind. He disingenuously chuckled to himself before telling the jury that sometimes his daughter Ella would lie about homework, but after checking, like an involved and doting father, she would earn some TV time together. Then he described a Norman Rockwell depiction of giving the children piggyback rides on the way to tucking them in with a bedtime story. Unlike past defendants we have discussed, who were excellent witnesses on their own behalf, Bill wasn't one of those. He came off as annoyed to be there, with answers vastly inconsistent with the facts we already knew to be true about his marriage. And as we know, Norman Rockwell never published picturesque drawings of a dutiful husband strangling his wife. The defendant told the jury after he put the children to bed, like Father of the Year, he sat down with Maureen and they held each other, cried, and vowed to always love each other. He stated he wasn't surprised that Maureen wanted a divorce. However, he believed it was premature and thought someone was, quote, in Maureen's ear, end quote. Maureen couldn't have possibly come to the decision on her own. He was still trying to determine who that someone was when they talked that night. He again described Maureen as a quiet person, which made their previous marriage counseling unproductive. Everything was Maureen's fault in Bill's world. After they hugged it out, Maureen shared some of her plans with him. Those plans involved selling her expensive SUV for a cheaper one and moving in with his mother. This is when the real Bill came out for a few minutes. He told the jury that Maureen's car was in his name, and she needed him to agree to sell it. He also stated that while he was okay with selling the house, he would have to be the one to set the purchase price. In other words, Bill wasn't going to make this easy. Bill was never going to agree on any price that allowed Maureen to escape. On top of the division of assets, Bill also wasn't going to allow his children to move in with his mother. Bill's sister Karen and niece also lived with his mother. Apparently, Karen had been engaged twice, and therefore wasn't a good role model for his children to be around. Apparently, a father who gambled away their college funds was a much better choice. He testified that he showed Maureen a photo he took of 2 empty bottles of wine, insinuating that she was an alcoholic unfit to raise his children. He made it clear he intended to go for custody, as he felt he was the better parent. Then Bill became teary-eyed and shared with the jury that he hadn't just made one suicide attempt. He had made 2 attempts. Bill Argie is a seasoned and experienced physician's assistant. If he had truly wanted to commit suicide, he would be dead. On cross, Bill's pauses weren't quite so long. His anger was engaged, and that led to quicker answers.
So, according to you, Maureen was a suicidal drunk who neglected her kids, right?
That's not what I said, sir.
Wasn't that the portrait that you were trying to paint for these jurors before the lunch recess?
That's the portrait that you're trying to portray, sir.
That would be an inaccurate portrait of Maureen, wouldn't it?
That you're trying to portray? Yes, sir.
That she was a suicidal drunk who neglected her kids, right? That would be inaccurate, right, Mr. Argie?
That you're trying to portray? Yes, sir.
And that would be a despicable character attack on Maureen, wouldn't it?
It would. It would.
The truth is, Maureen adored her kids, right?
Maureen was a good mother.
She was a great mother to her kids, right?
She was a great mother.
Well, except when she was passed out on the couch while you were giving the kids piggyback rides and reading to them, right?
That's what I stated, sir.
Who was giving your kids piggyback rides while you were blowing their college funds at the casino?
There was no blowing of college funds.
Except we know that isn't true. We know that Bill gambled away his car payment money, his mortgage money, his children's camp money, and their college funds. Bill gambled away every penny he could get his hands on, without any regard for his family. Bill's strategy on the stand was that every single person who testified against him was lying, mistaken, or remembering things that just didn't happen.
And you weren't crying when you talked to your friend, your good friend, Dan LaRochelle, about killing your wife rather than paying child support, right?
That's inaccurate. I never had that conversation with him.
Never had that conversation. Why would Mr. LaRochelle lie about that?
I can tell you one thing, that he's off by the year. He's off by where it happened. And the conversation never occurred.
Why would Mr. LaRochelle lie about that?
Well, considering that I told him that he wasn't a friend anymore.
We know why you would lie to these jurors, right? Right?
I don't know.
You don't know. You're a smart guy, right, Mr. Argie? You're on trial for murder, right?
Well, you're the one that asked the question, sir.
Yeah. What possible motive would you have to lie to the jury?
I don't know. What motive is that?
Comes to mind? To get away with murder? Would that be a possible motive why you would lie to these jurors?
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I am not lying to you.
But that conversation with Mr. LaRochelle never occurred, right?
That is correct.
And those conversations with the three witnesses who testified to these jurors, those conversations never occurred, right?
That is correct.
And that conversation with Mr. Timbus in which you solicited your wife's murder, right?
That is correct.
According to Bill, everyone was lying because they all wanted to get back at him. At the time of Maureen's murder, he was concerned his truck was about to be repossessed. He was several months behind on the mortgage. He had no savings. His bank account was $189 in the negative, and he had to use Maureen's money to gamble. The only bill that was current was the $400,000 life insurance policy he had against Maureen. That was the only debt that took priority over his gambling.
Your own doting mother told you days before Maureen's death that you were unfit to care for your own kids, right?
That was her opinion.
That was a text message we saw, right?
Correct.
And that upset you, your mother telling you that, right?
I don't think I really had an opinion either way.
And it also upset you that your mother was providing a home for Maureen and the kids, right?
Yeah, I think I would agree to that.
You felt betrayed by your family.
Correct.
Also, with respect to this alleged conversation with Maureen before she apparently took her own life, you talked about fighting for division of assets, right?
Correct.
And then you were at least planning to file for bankruptcy, right?
I had discussed with a lawyer, yes.
Division of assets, we talking 50-50?
The lawyer, yes.
What's half of negative $189, which is what you had in your bank accounts at the time?
That's not what was going to be split.
What is half of the massage and food bill that you skipped out of from the poker room and whatever outstanding gambling debts you had around town?
Again, that's not half of what was going to be split.
What is half of that expensive new truck that you were leasing that you couldn't pay for and was about to be repossessed?
I'll tell you that that truck I could care less about.
Except he did care, because he had called Ford Motor Company 3 times explaining he had only worked 2 days that month and needed an extension on the payment. Bill told the jury that he wasn't focused on money because he was in a lucrative field and made a lot of money, when he did work. He tried to tell the jury the reason he was working so little was because he was trying to be home more to save his marriage by caring for the kids. He felt he was needed more at home. And with that, the defense rested their case in chief. Because the prosecution has the burden of proving their case, they usually get the first and last word in closing arguments. The DA began by telling the jury that Bill Argie was a self-centered narcissist who thought he could lie his way out of his crime. He thought he could gaslight the jury, the way he gaslit Maureen. He expected the jury to believe he was telling the truth over all his friends and family who painted a picture of an angry man who blamed his wife for all of his problems. They told the jury that Bill's family and friends all testified against him, and their testimony corroborated each other, as each of them testified that Bill didn't want to pay child support and gambled away his family's future. The DA told the jury the ultimate corroboration was the $400,000 life insurance on Maureen's life. Not only was it the amount the witnesses testified to, it was also left out on an ironing board to be found by police when they discovered Maureen's body. A life insurance policy that Maureen had no knowledge existed. The DA ended by asking the jury to find Bill Argie guilty for the premeditated murder of his wife. The defense didn't have much to work with. Their closing arguments were just 19 minutes long. They began by telling the jury that no one knows what happened the night of April 3rd, 2019. The DA can't give an accurate account of what happened or by whom, and for that reason, there was reasonable doubt. Apparently, the defense has never heard of circumstantial evidence or consciousness of guilt. They continued on by suggesting that because the medical examiner used the words probable homicide, it meant there was reasonable doubt. Apparently, cumulative evidence is also a concept the defense struggled with because these were beyond oversimplified and hollow arguments. They ended their closing arguments by asking the jury not to compound the tragedy of Maureen's death with a miscarriage of justice and allow Bill to go home to his children. They needed him. Of course, the jury rejected Bill's arguments of innocence by reasonable doubt, and promptly convicted him on both counts, hiding and destroying evidence as well as first-degree murder. The judge had had enough of Bill Argie, and set the next day for sentencing. They began the sentencing hearing with a heartbreaking impact statement from Maureen's brother, Matt Gaudette.
My name is Matt Gaudette. There is nothing that will make this emptiness go away or erase the pain of knowing the true anguish that Maureen was in before her life was stolen. I hope you as the defendant, as you leave here to spend your remaining years in your hell that you deserve, you also know that someday your children will know the truth about what you did to their mother. You will no longer receive calls from your children or letters from your children. You will never see them on Christmas morning and see the utter joy and delight in their eyes. Instead, you have stolen their innocence. They will not ask about you or talk about you, and you will become a distant memory. You are a selfish, cowardly, pathetic person who deserves to die alone, miserable and locked away for the rest of your life. Your malicious actions in April 2019 not only destroyed your family and the life of your children, but also the many young children who have been subjected to a horrendous evil at such a young age.
Matt went on to describe to the judge how his children and Maureen's children now have to spend a part of every holiday and every Mother's Day at a cemetery decorating Maureen's grave. They leave her small presents, since they no longer celebrate these events together. We are going to link the sentencing hearing in our show notes in case any of you want to listen to the impact statements in their entirety. Maureen's mother also gave an impact statement. She wrote a lovely tribute letter to Maureen, telling her all of the feelings she misses about her, from her laugh to exchanging recipes. Finally, Maureen's sister-in-law gave an impact statement directly to Bill, telling him all of the things he will miss because of his horrific actions, She told him his daughter asked her if she hated her dad for killing her mother. Conversations you shouldn't have to have with a child. Bill chose to speak to the court, and specifically to his in-laws. He told them he loved Maureen and was regretful her life ended the way it did. He followed up with apologies that he hoped his impending appeal for his wrongful conviction wouldn't cause them any further harm. We won't play that clip, because Bill has had enough time to speak during this trial. It's time for Bill to be quiet. After everyone had a chance to speak, the judge spoke. She didn't hold back her opinions of the defendant. She began by sincerely offering her sympathies to the Cadet family. She told them she hoped they took some solace in knowing that Maureen was universally described by family and friends in such glowing terms. Then she spoke directly to Bill Argie.
Mr. Argie, the evidence against you in this case was overwhelming, as evident by the swift verdict that was rendered in this case. Your selfish, narcissistic, and possibly addicted-fueled behavior led to the devastation of your family. Not just your mother or your sisters or the Gaudets, but most importantly, 2 small children. The ripple effect is going to be lifelong. Every time someone speaks of family in front of your children, they're going to relive this pain. In school and social activities, the inconsequential discussions of, well, what does your dad do for work? Is your mom going to be joining you at this school event? Every single time those issues are raised, every time they have to fill out a form, they're going to be stabbed in the back once again. You did this, not Maureen, not the state, not Dan, not Jamie, not Ray, not your mother, not your sisters. You. I am so sorry that you did not have the courage and the strength to let Maureen go. I am sorry that you made the choice you did on April 4, 2019. I hope from the bottom of my heart that you someday will realize and accept the consequences of the actions that you undertook that day.
And with that, she sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 3 years on the evidence tampering charge to run concurrently. Bill Argie was an addict. His addiction was gambling. At one time, he had the American dream. A supportive family, a great education, a prestigious job, a beautiful wife, and 2 happy children with limitless futures. Apparently, that wasn't enough. Bill wanted more, while never realizing he already had everything. He had a selfish and insidious compulsion to gamble. Despite his many losses, he continued to bet on himself. In the process, Bill took from this world someone who was making a difference. Someone described universally by family and friends as a saint. Someone who chose a vocation where she could advocate for others and help those who were the most vulnerable in this society. Bill was never going to allow Maureen to win. There would be no moving on for Maureen. Unfortunately, Maureen never realized how vulnerable she was in the one place she should have felt the safest, inside her own home. The world is a worse place without Maureen in it. In the name of greed, Bill Argie gambled away his family, his wife, and eventually his own future. With nothing left to lose, He even gambled away his freedom. That was Bill's last bet. Now, society is safer without him in it. Thank you for listening to this episode of Crime Trials. If you are interested in supporting our show, please don't forget to hit subscribe on the podcast player of your choice. You can also recommend our podcast to a friend or post about us on your social media accounts.